In this episode of Pros vs. Ams, we're going to show you how to make a pro-like lower body pivot, and in the process, get rid of that nasty early extension. The lower body pivot is a big issue for a lot of golfers, and inside of that, it's mainly a hip depth issue that we see quite often. And we're looking at a GEARS image here with the bones feature turned on, and this faint white line at the bottom is a vertical pane of glass that GEARS puts right down behind the golfer's rear end, and it runs parallel with the target line. So that's what you're looking at now. And it just gives us a really nice visual representation of how the golfer moves relative to the target line. Does he move the hips closer to the target line, early extension, or does he move them away, which is what we'd like to see? And the difficulty with this move, when we see the golfer float in towards the target line like you're seeing here, is that it really creates a big space issue. So the golf swing, you can boil it down to a time and a space issue. We've got, once the club moves, we got basically a second to do everything. And then where we set the ball at address, or where the ball is lying on the ground at address, that creates our space. We've got that given amount of room to operate in. And we see golfers so often, and this plagues not only high handicap golfers, but low handicap and even professionals, is the hips lose their depth, both either in the backswing or in the downswing most often, which is set up by the backswing. But you lose the depth in the hips in the downswing, and you really crowd into the golf ball. And what that causes is, so you've lost that space. So what it causes is you either have to raise the handle up, time the handle raising up, which we see a lot of toe impacts because of that. Or if you don't time it correctly, obviously you're getting closer to the golf ball and that heel comes in. So you get those nasty heel shots or even those sideways handoff shanks. So it really creates, and that's just a couple of the issues, it really creates a lot of nasty issues for the golfer when he loses his hip depth in the backswing. So let's roll this guy forward, and we're going to take a look at, we're going to kind of get rid of his body here, and we're going to take a look at the bones very clearly. And what we're going to do is we're going to trace the left hip and the right hip, and then we're going to trace the center of his spine. And we just put a crosshair here to reference where he's starting at, and then we're going to track that to where he winds up at impact. So if we get him moving, we're going to see our yellow line here represents his left hip. It's tracing the left hip joint. The green line is tracing his right hip joint, and that pink line is tracing the center of his spine there. So as we can see, as he gets to the top of his swing, we can see a ton more travel of that left hip than the right hip. So the right hip basically kind of came back, now is circling back out towards the golf ball. The left hip went really wide in and away from the target. And then we can see obviously the center of the hips kind of fell somewhere in between. So now as we take him down to left arm parallel, we can see how he's trying to recover from that big sweeping hook, we'll say, of the left hip going inward. Now he's trying to get back outward, and we can see how closed off he is. The right hip's pretty much returned to where it was at address. So again, the right hip has done very little so far. The left hip has been hyperactive. Now I will say this, we'll roll him back. This golfer was trying to get more hip turn because he wasn't hitting it as far as he thought he should. So in an effort to get more hip turn, which is again something we see all the time with golfers, they get that left hip super active. You know, the old saying, get the knee behind the ball, get the shoulder over the right foot, all of those things. What that does most often is really make that left hip travel a ton in the backswing. Now, golf isn't a backswing sport. It's an impact sport. So the implications of that are it creates a difficult time for the downswing and impact. Now, as we roll him into impact, that's left arm parallel again, into impact, we can see how much more travel that left hip did to basically wind up just a little bit farther forward than where it started at address. And the right hip did not much of anything other than go back and then really sail out towards the golf ball. And what causes the problem is when that left hip goes that far out in front, you're left with, again, it's a timing issue. On the downswing, you're looking at less than a quarter of a second. Right here at left arm parallel, that left hip is still way out there in front, kind of blocking the right hip. Again, we've got space there that we're dealing with. So now we've got less than 1/10 of a second into impact. There is just simply not enough time to reorganize all of that, to get that left hip back out of the way so that right hip has somewhere to go. So this creates the stall. The right hip's going to stall because, again, we've got to get the club down there some way. And the left hip is blocking the whole parade. We've got nowhere to go with the right, so it just kind of stalls out, and you get what you get at impact. Very little rotation. We can see that our crosshairs now is really moved towards the golf ball and slightly forward. And you're going to get a very inconsistent impact pattern because of this. So now let's look at our pro. And we're going to see something quite a bit different. So we'll play him through here, and you can just see how he moves relative to that pane of glass. So drastically different movements. And then if we take him on, we'll just show you the behind view where you can see him pressing up against that pane of glass on his cheeks there as he rotates and pivots throughout the golf swing. So here we are. We're going to get rid of the body and just look at the bones, and we're going to trace the same way we did our amateur golfer. We can see already how much more active the right hip is compared to what we saw with the AM. So the right hip's moving a little bit back and really kind of sweeping around towards the target. Left hip is going more forward, but really pretty balanced between the left and the right and pivoting around that center location much more. Then we can see, as all great ball strikers do, there's that drift, there's that fall set up towards the target as the backswing completes. Right there, that's the top of the backswing. We can see how everything's already in motion, moving towards that left side, over that left foot. And as we scroll him forward, again, now we've got basically, just eyeballing it, pretty similar amounts of yellow line versus green line. And again, that's a well-balanced pivot, and all of it is kind of shifted forward. And then that's left arm parallel, of course. And then if we take him down into impact, we can see how, I'll actually just show you this, how these right leg bones, the left leg bones, this left hip joint is now pretty much centered up over top of the ankle. And that's a really strong, really powerful impact location to be in. And we can see just how different, how equal these lines are compared to what we saw in the amateur golfer. And this is how you pivot the hips. This is how you maintain hip depth. And we can see, contrasted with the amateur player, where his crosshair here is actually gone towards the target quite a bit and away from the target line, away from the ball as he enters impact. And then we'll just scroll him on through. So let's take a look at a side-by-side here, and we'll see, obviously, the AM's on the left, our pros on the right. We get a much clearer difference here when these golfers are together. There they are at the top. See, again, just it's quite drastic how much different the left hip operates in these two golfers. Again, the pros are excellent at impact. Most of us normal golfers are really hyperactive with those hips in the early part of the swing, in the backswing, the rotation, the closing part we do really well. The pros do the opening part really well. And you can see how much more room this amateur golfer has to cover. He's made the job so much more difficult. The pros made it easy for himself. Then there they are at impact. Just miles difference in how the hips have maintained or added depth on the right and lost depth here on the left. So what does all this mean for you? If you're more like the golfer on the left and want to be more like the golfer on the right, then we've got to just retrain how these hips work in our pivot. We've got to put some focused practice in and really retrain the sequencing of movements. Because if we just look at the overall movement pattern, there's a more complicated, more taxing movement pattern by the amateur than there is on the pro. So this isn't a matter of pro just has more talent and is able to do things. It's more of a matter of the pro's doing less work, creating less work for himself early so he can have all those advantages on the downswing, whereas the AM is getting himself in more trouble early by doing more things and then doesn't have the time to undo all of those things. So it's not really a talent issue at all. It's more of just how we organize these movements in our pivot. And the best way to train this is to remove the golf club. So either lay it on the ground or just set it across your shoulders with your arms folded across your shoulders there. And you've really got to be hyper focused and think, what is my right hip doing? It needs to move more like the right hip here on the right side of the screen than it does with the right hip on the left side. And then you got to think, all right, so my right hip is going a little bit away from the target and starting to circle back. Whereas before, my left hip may have been doing that, may have been really sweeping away from the target. Now I want to really focus on my right hip, make sure my right hip gets moving back and around me. Golfers are really good at focusing on what's in front of their eyes, so the left side of the body. We need to be a little bit more conscious of how the right side is moving in this pivot. Now, as you get really good at that without a golf club, because the golf club's like magic, right? It's like Harry Potter's wand. It will undo all of these good things if it's not moving correctly. So you're going to get the pivot right without the club. And then you're going to add the club. We're not going to hit balls yet. You're just going to add the club and make swings, still focusing on these same movements. Now, if adding the golf clubs messes the movements up, then we know there's a club issue, and we'll link you to a video here talking more about the club issue. But we've got to have both the club and the body working together, because the club can absolutely undo the body and the body can undo the club movements. So they've got to be in sync. And then once you get that piece together, you got no club, now you've got the club. Now we start hitting balls, and do it slowly at first and build up to it. You're not going to see much improvement. And we have guys come in all the time and say, I've worked on this for 20 years and I haven't been able to change it. It's because you're always trying to change it, or they're always trying to change it at full speed and just, thinking their way through it at full speed, which is not going to happen because the golf swing's too fast. So if you want to be more like the golfer on the right and less like the golfer on the left, the way to do that is to break it down, go into hyper focus mode, and really piece these things together with some motion. So without the club, with the club, and then hitting balls. That, if you do that enough, right? 5-10 minutes a day, don't do it, all day long. 5-10 minutes a day over a course of weeks or months, you will start to move more like the golfer on the right. And then you're really going to start to see some benefit in your ball striking. So give that a shot. If you need more hip depth at the right times in the golf swing, do that practice regimen and you will see improvement.